Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. This time, we're going to take a deep dive into continuous learning in the workplace.
Sounds interesting.
We've got a ton of research reports, articles, and even some, I guess you could say dissenting voices out there. Because not everyone's thrilled about the idea of, always having to learn new things.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to kind of pick this apart and figure out what's really important for us, in this crazy world of work that just seems to be changing so rapidly.
Yeah, and it is kind of funny how we still tend to think of, learning as something that happens in a classroom
Right.
with a very structured kind of setting.
Yeah.
But our sources are pretty clear that in today's dynamic workplace,
Yeah.
that model just doesn't cut it anymore.
No, it doesn't at all. And I think a good place to start is just thinking about this stat. So back in 2022, one study found that 54%
Wow.
of workers needed reskilling.
Yeah.
And that was 2 years ago. So who knows what that number looks like today? What does that tell us about, the pace of change and this need for continuous learning?
Well, I think it's a real wake-up call. What we're seeing is this really fundamental shift in the nature of work itself. And, skills that were once considered, top of the line, really cutting edge, they're becoming obsolete and at an alarming rate.
Yep.
This isn't just about kind of keeping up anymore. It's really about, how do you stay ahead of the curve?
Right. And it's definitely not just signing up for a few, training programs here and there, right? It's something bigger than that. So how do we define continuous learning in the workplace? Especially, for someone like yourself who's already, so experienced in their field, what does that actually look like?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a broader concept than just kind of that formal classroom training, going and getting a certificate or something like that. I think it's more about cultivating this mindset of constant curiosity and really actively seeking out new knowledge, skills, things that maybe go beyond your immediate role.
Right. Right. And our sources all kind of hit on these common themes about why continuous learning is so important. And I think a lot of times we think, well, I'm already employed. I've already got a job, so why do I need to keep learning?
Yeah.
But it's not just about staying employed, is it?
It has a lot to do with personal and professional growth. When you master a new skill, it not only makes you more valuable to your company, you're bringing more to the table.
Yeah.
But I think it also does amazing things for your confidence. You become more comfortable taking on new challenges and, maybe contributing at a higher level.
Right. And what about just job satisfaction in general?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, continuous learning keeps your mind engaged and challenged. And, that sense of purpose and, intellectual stimulation, I think, is a real powerful antidote to burnout and, and really can lead to, I think, a much more fulfilling career.
Now, of course, all of this sounds fantastic in theory, but I think there are probably some people listening who are like, yeah, this all sounds great, but, I'm already overwhelmed with the amount of information that's coming at me in a given day. How do I avoid drowning in all this information? Because, our sources do touch on that too, right? Like information overload is a real concern.
Oh, yeah. It's a valid concern. Absolutely. And, honestly, one that I think we all probably grapple with at times. So one of the most effective strategies, I think, is to really be specific about your learning goals. What skills do you really need to excel in your current role? What are the knowledge gaps that might be preventing you from reaching that next level in your career?
Right. So it's about being strategic, not just learning for the sake of learning, but really focusing in on what's going to move the needle for you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Focus on quality over quantity. And I think another key strategy is to really use technology to your advantage.
Right.
So we have all of these AI-powered platforms now that can help to curate content that's relevant to your needs and goals. And, imagine having a digital learning companion that can analyze your patterns and actually recommends resources tailored just for you. I think that's what these platforms are becoming capable of.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That takes the guesswork out of it, because that's what I think is so overwhelming. It's like, where do I even start? There's so much out there.
Yeah.
But, technology aside, our sources also point out that formal learning, that's not the only answer.
Yeah.
The Harvard Business Review, they actually said that only 10%
Right.
of development comes from formal settings. So where does that other 90% come from, and how do we tap into that?
Yeah, I think that's where informal learning really shines. Those everyday moments of discovery that happen outside of those structured training programs. Think about the conversations you have with colleagues. Maybe you're reading an article during your commute, a challenge that you have to tackle on a new project. All of those things are contributing to your growth.
Yeah, you're almost learning without realizing it.
Exactly. And I think being mindful of that informal learning is so important. It's recognizing the value of those experiences and then, maybe even seeking them out a little bit more actively.
Okay, so I think that makes a lot of sense. But, I have to say there are definitely some people who are naturally more resistant to change than others. How do we address that fear or that hesitation that some might have, about embracing continuous learning? Especially when you consider, I think it was a McKinsey study, said that something like 70% of change initiatives fail because of resistance.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That fear of the unknown is powerful. But I think organizations have a real responsibility here to create a culture that embraces learning,
Right.
where it's not seen as a burden. It's seen as, a part of the work itself.
So changing that perception of learning from being a chore to being an opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think communication is key there. Organizations need to articulate, why this is beneficial, both for the individual and for the company as a whole. And they also have to provide the resources and the support to make it a seamless and, hopefully even a rewarding experience.
Okay, so let's dive into some more practical strategies because I think we all agree, continuous learning is important. But how do we actually make it happen?
Sure, sure. So I think let's start with the individual.
Okay.
First step is to cultivate what we call a growth mindset. So instead of saying, I can't do this,
Right.
you shift it to, I can't do this yet.
Mhm.
It's a small change, but it's really powerful.
It's believing that you can grow and you can learn rather than being limited by your current skill set.
Absolutely. And that kind of mindset then opens you up to embrace challenges. You start to view setbacks as an opportunity to learn, to improve. Maybe you can reframe failure as a stepping stone to success.
So we're really kind of changing the way we think about our own potential.
Exactly, yeah. And it's not just about that internal dialogue either. It's about who are you surrounding yourself with? Are you surrounding yourself with people who inspire you, who challenge you? Seek out mentors, join professional networks, engage in conversations with colleagues who might offer different perspectives.
So continuous learning is not just a solo mission. It's about connecting with others and learning from their experiences as
Well,
well.
absolutely. And then I think once you've kind of cultivated that growth mindset, the next step is to really set those clear learning goals that we talked about earlier. Remember SMART specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound.
Right. Having a roadmap for your learning journey.
Exactly. Yeah, a roadmap. And that roadmap should be dynamic, it should evolve as you learn and grow.
Yeah.
So, reassess your goals regularly, adjust your course and celebrate those milestones along the way. Those small wins along the way. It's important to celebrate those, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
It helps keep the momentum going, keeps you motivated.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about some ways to really kind of bring continuous learning to life, some concrete strategies.
Okay, yeah, let's do it.
Hmm.
Because I think, we've touched on this idea of variety, like, it's not just one thing. So what are some practical examples of continuous learning, especially for those who are like, I'm stuck, I'm in a rut, I don't even know where to start?
Yeah. Well, I think of it kind of like a learning toolbox. You get to choose the tools that work best for you.
I like that.
So, conferences, for example, those can be incredibly valuable, I think. Imagine attending a global conference in your field. You'd be learning from leading experts. You're connecting with colleagues from around the world.
Right,
You're exposed to all these cutting edge ideas. I mean, there's nothing quite like that.
right. But not everyone can just, jet off to a conference every month.
Sure, sure.
So what are some other alternatives, especially for people who maybe prefer more of a self-paced approach?
Yeah. Well, in that case, online courses are a fantastic option. Platforms like Coursera, ADX, they offer this huge library of courses literally on any topic you can imagine.
That's true.
Many of them taught by professors from top universities around the world. And, the beauty of it is that you can learn anytime, anywhere, and at your own pace.
Yeah, that's a huge advantage.
Yeah.
But what about people who maybe need or crave a little more personalized guidance? Not just a course that they're kind of doing on their own.
Yeah, well, I think mentorship programs are incredibly valuable in that case. Imagine having a seasoned professional in your field kind of guide you, share their insights, provide you with personalized feedback. I mean, that's the power of mentorship.
It's almost like having a Sherpa guiding you, up the mountain of knowledge.
Yeah, I love that. And mentorship doesn't have to be this really formal thing. It could be as simple as connecting with a colleague that you admire and, asking them for some advice or maybe shadowing somebody in a different department
Yeah.
to gain exposure to new skills and perspectives.
So, again, it's that idea that continuous learning doesn't have to be this really formal, structured thing.
Yeah.
It can be those informal opportunities as well.
Absolutely. And often those informal moments are the most impactful, I think. A conversation you have with a colleague over lunch
Right.
might spark a new idea. Maybe you're working on a challenging project and it forces you to stretch your skills and learn new
Yeah,
things.
forced to.
You are, and that's a good thing.
Right. So being open to learning from every situation,
Yeah.
every interaction, every experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, let's talk about some practical tips for making this a habit.
Yeah.
Continuous learning, how do we make it part of our routine
Right.
rather than, a chore that you try to squeeze in?
Yeah. I'm all ears. What are some strategies that have worked for you?
Well, one of the most effective things I've found is to actually schedule dedicated learning time each week.
Oh, well,
Treat it like an important appointment.
block it out on your calendar like you would a meeting.
Exactly. And during that time, engage in any activity that aligns with your goals. Maybe read an industry publication, watch a TED Talk, take an online course. Even just taking time to reflect on what you've learned recently and how you might apply it to your work.
Right. So creating a ritual around it almost.
Exactly, yeah. And
Yeah.
even if it's just 15, 30 minutes a day, that consistency adds up over time.
It's the compound interest of learning.
I love that, the compound interest.
Little by little, it all adds up.
It does, yeah. Now, another tip that I'd offer is to embrace this concept of learning in the flow of work, or LifeOW, as it's often called.
Right. I remember we talked about that earlier. Remind us what that's all about and how it can kind of help us, squeeze learning into our busy workday.
Yeah, so LifeOW is all about finding opportunities to learn in real time as you're working, rather than treating learning as this separate activity.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about being curious, asking questions, seeking out information as you're encountering challenges or, new situations in your work.
So instead of struggling with something for an hour,
Right.
you take 10 minutes to research or ask a colleague.
Exactly, yeah. And in that process, you're learning and expanding your skills.
Yeah. So you're kind of turning those everyday work experiences into learning opportunities as well.
Precisely. And I think the beauty of LifeOW is that you can apply it to any task or project, big or small, whether you're troubleshooting a technical issue or brainstorming a new marketing campaign. There are always opportunities to learn and grow in the process.
Right. So shifting that mindset again from work is just a series of tasks to work is a continuous learning journey.
I love that. That's great. Now let's talk about leveraging technology a little bit. We talked about, AI-powered learning platforms, but there are a lot of other tools out there that can support our continuous learning.
Yeah, I'm eager to hear about those. What are some of your favorites? What do you use?
Well, one that I find incredibly helpful is Pocket.
Mhm.
It allows you to save articles, videos, anything you find online, basically. So you
Right.
can read or watch later. It's a great way to curate your own little library
Yeah.
of learning resources that you can access anytime.
It's like a digital briefcase full of information.
Exactly, exactly. And there are a ton of other tools and apps out there. Evernote for note-taking, Trello for project management, Slack for communication and collaboration.
So it's really about finding what fits your learning style and your workflow
Yeah,
and using those to make it easier to learn.
absolutely. And don't forget about podcasts. I mean, you're listening to one right now.
That's right.
But, they're a fantastic way to learn on the go,
Yeah.
during your commute, while you're exercising, even while you're doing chores around the house.
They're like audio learning snacks.
Yes, exactly. Audio learning snacks. And there are podcasts on literally every topic imaginable. Business, technology, history, philosophy, you name it.
And for the most part, they're free.
And easy to access.
Yeah.
So, beyond the specific tools and platforms, though, I think it's important to remember that human element of continuous learning.
Right.
We learn best when we're connected to others, when
Mm.
we're sharing our knowledge, learning from their experiences.
Yeah, yeah. So we touched on mentorship earlier,
Right.
but what are some other ways that we can kind of build that social connection into our learning?
Yeah, I think one way is to join or even create learning communities.
Okay.
These could be online forums, professional networks, even just informal groups of colleagues who share an interest in learning and development.
So surrounding yourself with people who are also passionate about learning.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And, those communities provide support, encouragement, accountability,
Yeah.
maybe even just a sense of camaraderie as you're going on that journey.
It's like having a cheerleading squad for your personal and professional development.
I love that. That's a great way to put it. And, don't underestimate the power of just simple conversations as well. Engaging in thoughtful discussions with colleagues, with friends, even family members,
Yeah.
can spark new ideas, challenge your assumptions, really broaden your perspectives.
So continuous learning is not just about what we consume, it's also about how we interact with the world around us.
Exactly, exactly. It's about being curious, asking questions, engaging in dialogue that helps us make sense of the world and where we fit in.
Now, I want to kind of shift gears a little bit because we've been focusing on the individual.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's really important to talk about the role that organizations play in fostering a culture of continuous learning. What are some key strategies that you've seen or that organizations can use to create an environment that really embraces and supports ongoing development?
That's a great question. And I think one that more and more organizations are kind of wrestling with, right?
Yeah.
I think the first step is leadership has to walk the talk.
Mm-hmm.
Leaders have to be vocal champions of continuous learning.
Right.
They need to model the behaviors that they want to see in their employees.
So it's not just saying learning is important, but actually showing that it's important.
Exactly. You're sending a clear message that learning is not just encouraged, it's expected.
Right.
And that message has to be reinforced through actions, not just words. Leaders should prioritize learning. They should allocate time for development.
Yeah.
They should even share their own learning journeys with their teams. I think that's a really powerful thing to do.
Right. So making it part of the culture. It's an investment, not an expense.
Exactly. And then beyond, just the leadership support, organizations also need to provide the resources and infrastructure that are necessary to support continuous learning.
What does that look like? What kind of resources?
Well, it could be providing access to those online learning platforms we talked about, allocating budget maybe for external courses or conferences,
Mm-hmm.
establishing mentorship programs, even, creating dedicated learning spaces within the workplace, making it as easy as possible.
So you're making learning accessible and convenient for everyone.
Exactly, yeah. And it's also about, creating a culture that celebrates learning, where employees feel comfortable sharing their knowledge,
Yeah.
asking questions, even making mistakes without fear of judgment.
Right. So creating that psychological safety so
Exactly.
that people feel like it's a collaborative process, that learning is iterative.
Absolutely, yeah. And to kind of further support that culture, I think organizations can incorporate learning goals into performance reviews,
Mm,
recognize and reward employees who are demonstrating a commitment to development,
right.
and maybe even create opportunities for employees to share their knowledge and expertise with others. Turn them into teachers as well.
Right. So making learning part of the DNA of the company.
Exactly. Now, while all of that is important, I think it's also really important for organizations to make sure that their learning initiatives are aligned with their overall strategic goals.
Right. So not just learning for learning's sake, but making sure that the learning that's happening is driving business outcomes.
Exactly. Yeah. Organizations need to define their learning needs very clearly, both for today and for the future.
Right.
And then they need to develop learning programs and initiatives that are tailored to meet those needs.
Right. So connecting the dots between individual learning goals and the overall strategic objectives of the organization.
Exactly. Yeah. And when organizations can do that successfully, I think they create this virtuous cycle where continuous learning is driving individual growth, which in turn fuels organizational success.
That's a win-win.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
It is a win-win. Now, we've been focusing a lot on the individual and organizational levels, but I think it's also important to just acknowledge the broader societal context of continuous learning.
Yeah.
We're living in a world that's increasingly complex, interconnected, rapidly changing.
Right.
So it's not just a personal or organizational imperative, it's a societal one.
Right. So it's really about creating a learning society.
Exactly. And this requires a collective effort, I think. Governments, educational institutions, businesses, and individuals all have a role to play in fostering this culture of lifelong learning.
So really creating a system that supports and encourages learning at every level,
Hmm.
from, early childhood education all the way to retirement and beyond.
Absolutely. And, by investing in education, in training, in these lifelong learning opportunities, I think we create a more equitable, prosperous, and innovative society. We all benefit in the end.
Okay, so we've talked about, taking in all this information.
Right.
But as we kind of wrap up this part of the conversation, I want to switch gears a little bit
Mm.
and talk about curation, because I think this is something that's so important for a lot of people who are feeling overwhelmed with the amount of information that's out there. So how do we become better curators of the information that we're taking in?
Yeah, I think curation is becoming such a valuable skill in today's world. It's about sifting through all the noise and identifying the most relevant and valuable information, and then, organizing it in a way that's accessible and meaningful.
It's almost like you're a museum curator,
Yeah.
carefully selecting artifacts
Right.
and arranging them to tell a story.
I love that analogy. Yeah, and just like a museum curator, a good information curator has to have a deep understanding of their audience and their needs. They know how to find the right information at the right time and then present it in a way that's engaging and impactful. So, how do we get better at that? I think one important step is to really be mindful of your information consumption habits.
Hmm.
Where are you getting your information from? What sources are you relying on? Are they trustworthy? Are they aligned with your learning goals?
Right. So being intentional and selective about what you're letting into your mind.
Exactly. And I think it's also about, developing a system for organizing and managing all that information that you collect.
What does that look like?
Well, it can be as simple as, creating folders in your email inbox, using a note-taking app like Evernote
Right.
to store articles and resources. You might even use a social bookmarking tool like Pocket, which we talked about earlier, to save links.
Yeah.
So it's about finding a system that works for you and then sticking to it. And as you become more comfortable with curation, you can even start to share your curated resources with others.
Oh, interesting. How would you do that?
Well, you can create email newsletters, blog posts, or even just social media updates. Highlight the information that you found most interesting and valuable.
So you're almost becoming a thought leader in your field
Hmm.
by doing that, sharing that with other people.
Exactly. And in the process of curating and sharing that information, you're deepening your own understanding of the topic,
Right.
but you're also adding value to the lives of others. So it's a win-win.
It is a win-win. Okay, so as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to focus on something that I think often gets overlooked in the rush to learn new things, which is reflection.
Yeah.
Why is that so crucial? And how do we make it more of a part of our learning journey?
Yeah, reflection is so important, I think. It often gets overlooked when we're, so focused on acquiring that new knowledge and those skills. But it's really the key, I think, to turning information into wisdom.
So it's not just about what we learn, it's about how we process what we learn.
Exactly. Reflection allows us to step back from the day to day, just pause
Yeah.
and ask ourselves some critical questions. What have I learned? How has my thinking changed? How can I apply this to my work, to my life?
So it's about making connections and really kind of drawing meaning from the experiences that we're having.
Exactly. Yeah. And through that process of reflection, we can internalize what we've learned and really make it our own.
Okay, so how can we make that a more regular practice? I think a lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah. Well, one really simple strategy is to actually schedule dedicated reflection time in your calendar, just like you would schedule a meeting.
Block it off.
Block it off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Make it a non-negotiable commitment. And during that time, engage in any activity that helps you to reflect. Journaling, meditation, taking a walk in nature, even just sitting quietly and thinking.
So creating space for mindful contemplation.
Exactly. Yeah. And another strategy that can be helpful is to actually find a reflection buddy, a colleague, a friend, a mentor,
Oh, okay.
somebody you can meet with regularly and discuss your learning experiences, reflect on what you've learned together.
So it's almost like a thought partner.
Yeah, a thought partner. Exactly. And by sharing our reflections with others, we can often gain new insights and perspectives that we wouldn't have on our own.
So again, it can be social. It's not always a solo mission.
Exactly. Now, beyond that scheduled reflection time and, the reflection buddy, there are lots of other ways to kind of weave reflection into your daily life. You can reflect on your commute while you're exercising, even while you're doing chores around the house. Just find those pockets of time where you can kind of just step back and think for a few minutes.
It's about finding those moments of stillness, I think.
Exactly, yeah. And the more you practice reflection, the more natural it will become. You'll start to notice those patterns, connect the dots, and really extract those valuable insights from your experiences.
So developing that reflective mindset, a habit of really thinking about what's going on and what it means.
Exactly. And that mindset is essential for continuous learning and growth, I think. It allows us to learn from our mistakes, identify our strengths and weaknesses,
Mm.
and then adjust our learning strategies as needed.
So really turning our experiences into valuable lessons that we can take with us.
Exactly. Now, I want to shift our focus to one of the, I think, really exciting aspects of continuous learning, this idea of learning transfer.
Learning transfer, what is that?
Yeah, so learning transfer is the ability to take what you've learned in one context and apply it to another. So it's about taking the knowledge and skills, you might have picked up in a classroom, a workshop, a book,
Right.
and then actually using them in the real world.
So bridging that gap between theory and practice.
Exactly. Yeah. And honestly, it's one of the biggest challenges in learning and development.
Oh, how so?
Well, learning doesn't always transfer neatly from one situation to another. For example, you might learn about leadership principles in a workshop, but those principles might not translate directly to the specific challenges you face in your workplace.
Right.
So, how do we make that transfer more effective? Well, one strategy is to actively look for connections between what you're learning and your own real-world experiences.
So instead of passively taking in information, you're thinking, how can I use this?
Exactly. Yeah. And another helpful strategy is to just practice applying what you've learned in different contexts.
Okay, so for example, if you're taking a workshop about communication skills, you might try applying those in a team meeting or when you're giving a presentation.
Precisely. And by practicing in different situations, you'll start to see those patterns and the principles that apply across the board.
Right, so taking it out of the classroom and into the real world.
Exactly. And another key element of learning transfer is, you guessed it, reflection.
Oh, there it is again. We were just talking about that. How does it relate to learning transfer?
Well, reflection allows us to step back from those experiences and ask ourselves what worked well, what didn't, what can I do differently next time?
So using reflection to analyze what happened and figure out what you learned and how you can use that in the future.
Exactly. And the more we reflect, the more effective we become at transferring that learning to new situations.
Okay, so we've talked about some individual strategies, but I think organizations also have a role to play here, right? In supporting that transfer of learning.
They absolutely do. Organizations can create environments that really encourage and support that transfer of learning.
How so?
Well, by providing opportunities for employees to apply what they've learned, by creating a culture of feedback and coaching,
Mm-hmm.
and by recognizing and rewarding those who are successfully transferring that learning into the workplace.
So you're making it a priority, not just learning, but actually using what you learned.
Exactly. And when organizations do that, they benefit from a more skilled, more adaptable, and a more innovative workforce.
Another win-win.
It is. It is. Now, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to kind of look ahead a little bit
Okay.
and talk about this concept of future-proofing our skills. Because the world is changing so rapidly, I think it's something we all have to think about.
Yeah, it feels like a very daunting task.
Mm.
Like, how do we even begin to future-proof ourselves when we don't know what the future holds?
It can feel daunting, that's for sure. But I think the key is to shift our mindset from, trying to predict the future,
Right.
to really focusing on building adaptability and resilience.
Okay, so more about being prepared for anything rather than trying to guess what that anything might be.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that the future is uncertain.
Yeah.
And that the best way to prepare is to develop a broad set of skills and a mindset that embraces change.
So more about that growth mindset we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. Now, that being said, I do think there are things we can do to, make educated guesses about the skills that will be valuable in the future.
Okay, so how do we do that? Where do we even start?
Well, there are some great resources out there that can provide insights into global employment trends. For example, the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report.
Okay, yeah.
That report identifies the skills that are likely to be in high demand in the coming years.
I've heard of that report.
Yeah.
What are some of the key takeaways? What should we be focusing on?
Well, one thing that's clear is that technology is going to continue to be a dominant force.
No surprise there.
Right. So skills related to things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, data analysis, cybersecurity, those are consistently ranked high on the list.
So for those of us who aren't, programmers or data scientists,
Yeah,
are there other skills that are valuable in this changing landscape?
absolutely. While those technical skills are essential,
Yeah.
what we often call human skills are becoming increasingly important as well.
Okay. Human skills, what does that mean?
Well, these are the skills that are, uniquely human, the things that are hard for machines to replicate. So, critical thinking, creativity, communication, collaboration, emotional intelligence, problem solving. These are all human skills that are really valued in the workplace.
So it's not just about learning to code, it's about learning to think and create and connect with others.
Precisely. And the great thing about those human skills is that they are transferable across industries and roles.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so even if, your current job becomes automated, you'll still have valuable skills that you can take with you.
It's like a universal toolkit.
I love that analogy, a universal toolkit, yeah. And you can develop those human skills through a variety of experiences, both within the workplace and outside of it.
Like what? What are some examples?
Well, volunteering for a community organization. That can help you develop leadership skills, communication skills. Maybe you take an improv class to boost your creativity and collaboration skills. Reading literature can enhance your empathy and emotional intelligence.
So you're saying continuous learning is not just about, acquiring those hard skills.
Yeah.
It's about becoming a more well-rounded individual in general.
Absolutely. And by focusing on developing both our technical skills and our human skills,
Right.
we can really prepare ourselves to thrive in that rapidly evolving world of work. We'll be ready for whatever comes our way.
Okay, now, individuals have a responsibility to, invest in their own development. But what about organizations? What role do they play in helping employees future-proof their skills?
Yeah, I think organizations have a huge role to play here.
Yeah.
They have a vested interest in making sure that their workforce is equipped for the challenges of the future.
Absolutely.
So what can they do? Well, one really important step is to create a culture that values and encourages continuous learning. This could involve offering dedicated time for learning, providing access to resources like those online learning platforms we talked about, establishing mentorship programs, and then recognizing and rewarding employees who are committed to their own development.
So really baking it into the culture of the company.
Exactly, yeah. And beyond just creating that supportive culture, organizations can implement, specific programs that focus on future-proofing skills.
Okay, such as, what would that look like?
Well, it could be, providing training on those emerging technologies we talked about, offering job rotations or stretch assignments that allow employees to gain experience in new areas,
Right.
sponsoring external courses or certifications, things that align with the organization's long-term goals.
So being proactive and really, investing in the workforce of the future.
Exactly, yeah. And when organizations do this, they benefit in a couple of ways. They have a more skilled and adaptable workforce, but they're also demonstrating their commitment to their employees' growth and development, which can have a really positive impact on engagement and retention.
Another win-win.
It is. It is. Now, beyond specific programs, we can also use technology in some really interesting ways to support employees.
Okay.
Those AI-powered learning platforms we talked about can analyze an individual's skills gaps and recommend a personalized learning path that's aligned with future job requirements.
Wow. It's like having a personal career navigator.
It is. It really is. And, these platforms can track progress, provide insights that help organizations figure out where they need to invest in additional training or resources.
So using data to make those decisions about workforce development.
Exactly. And I think as technology continues to evolve, we'll see even more innovative ways to support continuous learning and future-proofing.
This has been such a fascinating conversation. We've covered a lot of ground. I feel like you've given our listeners a lot to think about.
Me too. It's been a pleasure talking about this with you.
And before we sign off, I'd like to leave everyone with one final thought. Continuous learning isn't just a means to an end. It's really a journey of self-discovery and growth. It's about becoming the best version of ourselves, both personally and professionally.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of continuous learning. We hope you found it valuable. And until next time, happy learning.